So much for joining us. Our fellow teacher, Dr. Ameet Aggarwal, is back with us today to talk about homeopathy, trauma healing, and gut-liver-adrenal connection to depression and loneliness. Voted one of the top 43 naturopathic doctors worldwide, Dr. Ameet helps thousands of people around the world heal from trauma, anxiety, depression, and chronic disease by combining naturopathic medicine, psychotherapy, homeopathy, and family constellations therapy to heal the root causes of disease and emotional illness. Welcome back to Avaya, Ameet.
Thanks, Andy. Super excited to really look at the root causes of depression, whether it's physiological, whether it's emotional trauma, and also looking at the different remedies people can use rather than relying only on therapy or only on supplements.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into remedies. So why, first off, is homeopathy so important for people struggling with depression and loneliness, and what remedies might be useful for them?
So homeopathy is an energetic form of medicine made by diluting substances multiple times, right? And people struggling from depression and loneliness have their own unique picture. What does that mean? So some people with depression feel very withdrawn and they're self-criticizing, right? And they have a lot of fear and anxiety as well. Other people with depression might have suicidal thoughts, right? And a lot of guilt, a sense of failure and worthlessness. Other people might have lack of motivation, and lack of energy. Each of these pictures are different. And of course, people have a combination of these pictures. And why homeopathy is important is because in homeopathy, the symptoms of a person, the individual symptoms are super important to select the right remedy for them, right? So if somebody has that withdrawn state, right, and resentfulness, and maybe cries a lot and weeps a lot with sad music and things like that, then I would choose a unique homeopathic remedy for that state. And because I'm choosing a unique remedy for their individual state, the remedy works much deeper and much faster than using just a common prescription medicine. Okay? And also why homeopathy is important, and I'll cover some of the remedies we use for different states. The other reason why homeopathy is super important for depression and loneliness is because often depression and loneliness come after a trauma, right? If you've been betrayed by a loved one, if you've lost a lot of money, if you're burnt out, all these events can lead to what we call adrenal fatigue, burnout, and a sense of anxiety, depression, and loneliness as well, isolation or lack of confidence even for engaging socially, which contributes to loneliness, right? And so based on the type of trauma a person has, we can also select a remedy. If a person's had a betrayal or a loss of a loved one, I might choose something like Ignatia or Natrum muriaticum. If somebody's lost a lot of money and gone through a lot of failure and has suicidal thoughts and guilt, then I might choose Aurum muriaticum. If somebody's super burnt out and doesn't have the energy to live anymore, I might choose phosphoric acid or calliphosphoricum. Those are great remedies for adrenal fatigue, contributing to depression and anxiety, right? So the symptoms a person has, as well as the type of trauma a person has been through, indicate what remedy they need. And because of that uniqueness, then the selected remedy is much more effective than just using blanket remedies.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that a lot of times this depression and loneliness comes after a trauma. Do you see a lot of people who have had developmental trauma that then that manifests into depression and loneliness as adults?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So in developmental trauma, let's say there's abandonment from one of the parents, or you're seeing a lot of violence, or you've been abused, right? Your nervous system is super fragile. And when your nervous system is super fragile, you go into a fight or flight response, an adrenal response, or even a freeze response. And when you have a fight, flight, or freeze response, basically it affects your neurotransmitters in your brain. So serotonin, dopamine, melatonin, GABA. GABA is your anti-anxiety neurotransmitter. All these neurotransmitters start dropping. And when they start dropping, you're bound to experience more depression, anxiety, insomnia, and also chronic fatigue syndrome, right? And so if you have unhealed trauma, then your nervous system is locked in that state, of fight, flight, or freeze. And therefore, you're continuously producing an imbalanced amount of neurotransmitters. And so when you heal the trauma using psychotherapy and the homeopathic remedies I talked about, and I'll cover some more remedies, then the nervous system releases itself. It gets released from that energetic influence of trauma. And when you release your adrenal glands and your nervous system and they start self-regulating, then your neurotransmitters come more into balance, right? So serotonin goes up, dopamine goes up, GABA improves, melatonin also improves, and then your mood stabilizes, right? And so some people spend years in therapy looking at one individual event at a time. And why I love homeopathy is because it encapsulates or captures your entire symptom picture. And we find the remedy that really stimulates your entire vital force rather than focusing on one event at a time, right? So you get a much faster and deeper and more profound healing with homeopathy.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned some other remedies that you wanted to mention. Can you mention those before we move on to family constellations?
Absolutely. So I covered aurum metallicum, great for some trauma due to loss and grief and a sense of low self-worth. The symptom picture of aurum as well, if people have depression, could be, suicidal thoughts, a sense of guilt, failure, a lot of self-criticism, and maybe praying excessively, like over superstitious. Yeah, not having that sense of faith in themselves as well. Of course, having faith in a higher power is super useful, and I encourage that for all my clients. But with aurum metallicum, they're really in a collapsed state, and they get a lot of intrusive thoughts that almost force them into paranoid praying. Nature muriaticum is great when people feel withdrawn, resentful, they don't trust people, they might have headaches, they don't enjoy doing the things they used to like doing, right? And they might even crave salty foods, and that's typical for adrenal fatigue as well. And if somebody feels, really lonely and like that sense of crying when there's music playing, especially soft music or sentimental music, and they break out into tears, that's also typically nature muriaticum. And then we have the acid remedies, whether it's phosphoric acid, picric acid, fluoric acid. Homeopathic acid remedies I often use when there's burnout, adrenal burnout. And so in my online course, I cover the different remedies and the different pictures that they're specific for, right? Kali phosphoricum, great remedy for adrenal burnout. Yeah. Picric acid, phosphoric acid, those are often when there's a sense of anxiety as well with your depression. Staphylos aureus I often use when somebody has suppressed emotions, a lot of suppressed anger. And when we suppress anger, hold it back, it turns into depression. We kind of collapse. So we're resenting somebody, which seems like the active state of anger. But inside, when we're not expressing, there's a part of us that goes inward and collapses, and we get resentful and depressed. And we don't realize it's happening, but suddenly we don't find ourselves happy anymore. And the route to happiness is really accessing anger. And that's what I do in the retreats that we run. So we run retreats in Africa and different parts of the world where we really help people access their innate emotional state, to express anger, to express vulnerability, and to feel connected in a very vulnerable way, so they get the support to those vulnerable parts of their nervous system. And that's what I find, Andy, creates the deepest transformation for people, being acknowledged where you're feeling vulnerable.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up anger because, some people might not know that connection between suppressed anger and depression, and just how important it is to get in touch with that anger and release it in healthy ways, of course. So let's move on to family constellations. So we've talked homeopathy, and I know you use family constellations, excuse me, for trauma release for depression. Can you talk about, first off, how trauma leads to depression, and what do you do for personal as well as ancestral trauma?
Okay, so often, like I said before, trauma leads to depression because trauma basically stimulates the nervous system into fight, flight, or freeze. And when that happens physiologically, your adrenal glands go into burnout. Yeah. And also the other cells that are making neurotransmitters in your body, they get dysregulated. So the neurotransmitters you're producing and the cortisol levels, the cortisol production gets dysregulated. So then we have a drop in neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, GABA, melatonin, which leads to chronic depression. Also, trauma creates negative beliefs for people. They feel withdrawn, they feel unsafe, they feel suspicious, they feel worthless, right? They feel it's their fault. Yeah, often when we get traumatized below the age of 9, we blame the event on ourselves. Yeah, if our parents are divorcing, if our mom's unhappy, we take responsibility for those experiences and we blame ourselves. That leads to a sense of depression as well. or unhappiness, yeah, and lack of just living life fully. And so in family constellations, we look at basically traumas that are happening for your family members, whether it's your parents, whether it's your grandparents, uncles, aunts, people in the family system. Because science has shown that we do inherit trauma from our ancestors. And in family constellations, we actually have the ability to see which traumas you've inherited from which family members. So if mom is being abused by dad very often, the child will often support the weaker parent, whether it's the mom or the abused father, yeah, or the neglected father. And when we side with a particular parent and we rescue them from their depression, we feel depressed with them. We often join them in their sadness. And it's an act of love and loyalty. It's very common. And we grow up with this habit. Now, this relationship to love and bonding is through connecting with depression and sadness and rescuing. That's our association of communication, connection, and love. And we block out other forms of contact with other people, with happiness, with support, with love, because we're busy rescuing a broken parent, for example. And so that leads to chronic unhappiness. And we go into codependent relationships and a sense of, gosh, if I'm happy, it means I'll leave my mom alone and she will suffer on my own. So there's a sense of guilt if I feel happier than a weak parent, right? So that sense of guilt and loyalty often leads to depression. And in constellation work, we use healing sentences to break out of these entanglements, what we call them. I'll give a few healing sentences, but another example I want to give that leads to depression often is miscarriages and abortions. Yeah, so if there's a missing child in the system, I as a sibling, if my mom has had a miscarriage or abortion, I might basically feel the grief of my parents without knowing it. Okay, and I'll have this unexplained depression or anxiety. One. Number two, if that child is unacknowledged, I think I'm the first child, I will have the sense of anxiety and possibly depression. And the moment that missing child is acknowledged, that child came before me, then I'll have a sense of relief in my body because I'll recognize I'm in the second position, not the first position. That sense of relief can undo depression and anxiety very fast. In fact, I've seen it happen multiple times where homeopathic remedies, normal psychotherapy is not working. Okay, so this is about healing the root cause. So family constellations uses healing sentences to disentangle from family trauma. One of my favorite sentences I use when we say it to parents, if we're carrying the burden of our parents, for example, it would be something like, "Dear mom, I leave this with you. I've been carrying it on your behalf out of love and respect for your pain. And now I see a better way to respect you and honor you would be to really treat you and see you as the bigger one. I am the child, you're the big one. And I honor you as the big one, being able to carry the weight of this problem as the big one. And please see me as your child now. I give this burden back to you with respect, with deep respect. And please forgive me if I cannot carry it anymore. I will carry what belongs to me and leave with you what is yours." For example, yeah, that's one way of saying the sentence. Of course, there's different versions of saying the sentence depending on the individuality and the relationship of the two people. And we feel this out in the retreats. And then for a missing child, I can say, "Dear sibling, I honor you. I honor your place as the first child or the third child or the fourth, whatever. And I give you a place in our family." And then I'll say to my parents, "Dear mom and dad, I acknowledge this child. Dear mom, I see your grief for this child is yours. I have my own grief. I miss this child as well. I miss my brother or my sister. I see your pain is different and I leave it with you. Please see me as the second child and this child as the first child. I want to be acknowledged as the second child in this system." Yeah. So if you're very sensitive, you can feel the energetic nuances in these sentences. Very important to disentangle the confusion that comes when we don't acknowledge missing children, or the confusion that comes when we borrow the pain and suffering of our parents. Yeah. There's multiple other examples of imbalances in family system, whether it's ex-lovers of our parents, which we haven't acknowledged, if there's murders in the system, So I've treated a lot of people who have ancestors in the Holocaust, for example, and they're carrying the atrocities, right? Or they're carrying maybe the pain of the perpetrators as well, right? Affairs of parents are felt by the children. So some children I treat have OCD because they're representing a secret in the family system. Whether it's OCD, schizophrenia, bipolar, often these are secrets that are unacknowledged in the system. Whether it's theft, a hidden lover, a secret affair, whatever it may be, these events manifest as mental health symptoms, depression, anxiety, loneliness as well. Yeah. Out of loyalty to my dad who lost his father, I will remain, sad and depressed and not make contact with the outside world. I will withdraw from communities because my dad was super sad, that he lost his father early. So the way my dad was sad, I will carry it. I will live it as well. So that creates an isolation for me from society as well, which can contribute to a sense of loneliness. I don't have the energetic tools to connect with people anymore because of my loyalty to my family members. And by disentangling from those loyalties, they were more available for heartfelt contact with society. And that brings a sense of community, less loneliness. And of course, loneliness can contribute to depression as well. So when we heal loneliness, then the depression also lifts. So it's both ways.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that. What you thought the link was between depression and loneliness and how that manifests.
Yeah, so depression is very traumatic for some people. There's a lot of shame and guilt around it as well. We don't feel up to we don't feel up to connecting with people. We're withdrawn maybe, or we feel shame about our symptoms. So we don't know how to have happy conversations. People are happy, they're joyful, and a lot of depressed people feel intimidated by happy people. They think they're super confident, they have it all together. And so why connect with these people? So we withdraw, and then we have a sense of loneliness. Depression also creates a sense of vulnerability. So we don't feel safe in company, right? So it's easier to be alone sometimes, but that creates the pain of loneliness. Yeah. And so when we heal depression with the homeopathy, with the psychotherapy, the constellation work, and a lot of other exercise that I cover in the course, then the pain and the vulnerability starts to dissolve and dissipate. Yeah. And then the self-confidence returns. And when you have more self-confidence, which is really a form of self-love, you feel more comfortable engaging with people. Yeah, because you have a sense of identity as well. Okay, this is me. I can be seen with other people. I'm comfortable being around people. And that will decrease the sense of loneliness. Yeah, loneliness and depression is a vicious cycle. They can contribute towards each other.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. Thank you for sharing about that. And let's move on to the adrenals. You talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but the gut, the liver, the adrenals also play a role in depression. Can you share about this connection and what remedies you use to stabilize brain chemicals to reduce depression?
Okay, so this is my favorite topic. If I'm going too fast, forgive me. All the information is on the website, which you're going to share. So we have a stomach, we have intestines. Your intestines are like a nice tube, a nice lining kept healthy by good bacteria and good food, right? Why am I talking about gut and all that related to mental health? Well, first of all, most of your serotonin and GABA, all the neurotransmitters are produced by the good bacteria in your gut. So when you destroy your gut with antibiotics, a poor diet, etc., these good bacteria that are producing neurotransmitters, they diminish, right? And so your neurotransmitter production also goes down. That's number one. Number two, when we destroy our gut and our gut lining, we get holes in the intestine. It's known as leaky gut syndrome. And with that, toxins leak into the bloodstream and cause inflammation everywhere in the body, leading cause for asthma, eczema, arthritis, etc. And then when that happens, our cortisol levels become imbalanced because the body produces cortisol to manage chronic inflammation. When cortisol becomes imbalanced, our neurotransmitters start dropping further. Serotonin, dopamine, GABA, melatonin all start dropping. And so that leads to anxiety and depression as well. Also, when cortisol becomes imbalanced, it affects our thyroid hormone. So the active form of our thyroid hormone is less available. And when we have low thyroid hormone, we also experience depression and fatigue. Okay. All this inflammation goes to the liver. I'm going to give you some remedy tips just now, but I want to explain the physiology. All this inflammation goes to the liver, one. Inflammation also creates toxins, which the liver has to deal with. Our liver is already inundated with toxins from the environment, pesticides, also chemicals we're having, too much alcohol, etc. So the liver becomes stagnant. It produces less bile. And when we produce less bile, that also affects our gut, leading to constipation, gas, bloating, and a worsening of leaky gut. The liver is also the master controller for hormones and sugar storage and immune cell activation and many other things, blood sugar storage. So when the liver becomes stagnant, our brain chemicals also become imbalanced, okay, leading to depression and anxiety. Our hormones become imbalanced. So lower progesterone levels, that often leads to anxiety and depression. Lower testosterone levels also leads to anxiety and depression. Yeah. So the liver is fundamental to heal, and I'll cover some of the remedies shortly. It's fundamental to heal when you're dealing with physiological causes of anxiety and depression. And also stress and anger, suppressed anger in Chinese medicine, we say that goes and affects the liver. It makes it more stagnant. And I see that all the time. People with resentment, anger, irritability, they often have a stagnant liver. And you can see that by they'll have very thick blue veins underneath their tongue, or they'll have a purplish color to their tongue. And they might have more heartburn, more gas, more bloating. All signs of liver stagnation, because there's less bile being produced. When the liver is stagnant, also it affects stomach acid levels, right, and digestion. So you can see how mood, irritability, emotions, and physical symptoms like digestive symptoms all go together because of the liver-gut connection, right? So in my online course, I cover these remedies, how to heal the gut and the liver and the adrenal system, and I'll cover some right now. First things is to use probiotics. No, first thing is to remove inflammatory foods, first of all, right? Typically, it's gluten and dairy, right? Or too much alcohol, too much coffee. I often avoid beef. I find beef very inflammatory for people. It's high in arachidonic acid. Then we use gut healing supplements, right? Probiotics, vitamin D, certain amino acids, that help repair the gut lining. And then, of course, the master organ needs to be detoxified and strengthened. That's the liver. So eating cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, right? Those all contain sulforaphanes, which are super important for liver detox. Bitter foods like rocket or bitter gourd, dandelion root. These are super important for stimulating bile flow, right? That gets the liver moving and heals the liver cells. Then I'll often add turmeric or onion and garlic to my cooking, right? And antioxidants. Turmeric is excellent for healing the liver cells and stimulating bile flow. And so is ginger, okay? Then certain herbs like milk thistle, dandelion, artichoke, and other remedies that I cover in the course are amazing for actually healing the liver cells as well as stimulating bile flow. And then on top of all these herbs, I always include homeopathic remedies to heal the cells. And why is that? Because homeopathy, because it's energetic in nature, heals the liver cells at a much deeper level, at a deep cellular level. So it stimulates bile flow, but also helps cellular repair. Yeah, so I find homeopathic remedies go much deeper in healing the liver than just using herbs alone. And we haven't talked about the adrenal glands, which I'll connect to right now.
Right. Yeah, no, go ahead.
So we have all this inflammation, right, going on. Inflammation also stresses the adrenal glands to make cortisol. And then your adrenal glands already burnt out from life stresses like work deadlines, financial stress, relationship issues, as well as unhealed trauma from childhood, as well as unhealed trauma from family entanglements, right? The ancestral trauma. All these things are stressing your nervous system. Compounded with modern day life, your adrenal glands and your nervous system goes into a burnout. Yeah, adrenal burnout. And that's why it's important to reduce inflammation and detoxify. One, to reduce the stress on the adrenal glands, but also to heal trauma, right? Using family constellations, homeopathy, and psychotherapy. I use Gestalt therapy and EMDR and somatic experiencing. And then to also do a lot of exercise and emotional release, yeah? And to meditate and to relax as well. All these things settle the nervous system, settle the adrenal glands to help them regulate, get them out of fight, flight, or freeze, right? So when you stabilize the adrenal glands, then they're still burnt out possibly. Then you can nourish them with herbs, right? And vitamins. So for example, vitamin C, zinc, and the B vitamins are excellent for nourishing the adrenal glands. I'll use ashwagandha, rhodiola, and other herbs that I cover in the course, depending on what your situation is, to really nourish those adrenal glands back to health. And on top of that, like I said, homeopathy is excellent for healing things energetically. I'll use some of the homeopathic remedies as well to recover from burnout, right? As well as the homeopathic remedies to release trauma, because those remedies go much deeper than just talk therapy. So the adrenal glands heal much faster and stabilize much faster when you introduce also the homeopathic remedies for adrenal burnout and for trauma.
And
So
this
it's a
is
very
kind of,
complete approach. Yeah.
yeah, this is kind of a big question, but related to all of this. So for people who have depression and loneliness, and maybe they have an imbalance in their adrenals and their liver and their gut, do you recommend is there like a regimen that you start them with that is higher dosages of various things to restore healing and restore their everything to working properly, and then it changes and is a little bit less, or how do you typically do that?
So good question. So the people doing my course often start by healing their emotions using these emotional healing exercises. That lessens the burden on the adrenal system. At the same time, they start healing their gut and their liver using some of the protocols I mentioned. Yeah. So it's a nice, steady approach. Once we remove the inflammation and detoxify the body and some of the stress is resolved, then I start introducing the adrenal herbs. If somebody's very toxic and inflamed, I don't like giving them adrenal herbs right away because it creates too much heat in the system. And they might break out in acne, or they might feel anxiety with the adrenal herbs, or there might be a negative reaction, or they might get more constipation, right? So we got to make sure that you're less inflamed, right? And really detoxified well in order to absorb those adrenal herbs and also to metabolize them in the right way. Because remember, you metabolize herbs, remedies, and foods differently depending on the state of your body, right? So there's a sequence: healing the emotions, of course, using the emotional healing exercises and the homeopathic remedies, and releasing trauma and stuck energy and anger. And then, of course, fixing the gut, reducing inflammation, and detoxifying at the same time. The gut healing and detoxification I often do concurrently.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Awesome. Thank you. And I get that that's a big question because everybody's different too and has different struggles and whatever. But thanks for giving us a little overview of the process and what it might look like. So let's talk about how people can learn more about you and your work. So you've got a great free ebook and videos below, as well as some webinars, and we've got buttons linking over to your website below.
There's free videos on healing the gut, the liver, emotional healing exercises as well. Then there's a full course with all these protocols I'm talking about, including all the homeopathic remedies. I'm also doing health retreats in different parts of the world, so people can come to Africa. I'm waiting for you guys to come, where we combine safari, beach time, and a lot of deep emotional healing combined with yoga, and of course, leisure time. I'm also doing these in Italy and different parts. And then I'm teaching an in-person course, in-person trainings on how to heal anxiety, depression, and trauma and chronic diseases with holistic medicine, trauma therapy, and psychotherapy, or energetic psychotherapy, like I like to call it. And that's taking place in Kenya, in Italy, and different parts of the world as well. If you're interested in those, email me directly. I might send some more links to you, Andy, but those are not on the website yet, right? But email me and I will give you the links because they're limited to a small number of people.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for letting us know, and everyone watching, the links that we just talked about are below, so you can click on and head over to Dr. Ameet's site. Do you have any last insight you'd like to leave us with before we wrap up?
So family constellations therapy is a super important therapy for people to explore. And I do these at the retreats and the in-person trainings. Why is that? Because family constellations often looks at the root cause of your depression, anxiety, or loneliness, right? What do I mean by that? What if you're taking supplements, etc., for your mood? Fine, they're working, they're stabilizing. But what if it's caused by the murder of an ancestor? What if it's caused by the unspoken depression your dad has because of an affair he's had with someone, and he hasn't said that to your mom, and you're picking that up? No matter how many supplements you're taking, you're not healing the root cause. But by doing family constellations, you relieve yourself of these entanglements and pain carried by your parents, by your ancestors, right? That frees up your nervous system, and therefore you'll utilize nutrients much better. Your supplements will work much faster. You'll even need less supplements and be less dependent on supplements over time when you really nourish yourself with self-love and freedom from these loyalties that kind of inhibit self-love or protect you from experiencing your free spirit, if I may say so.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you for that reminder, and thank you for talking with us as usual today. So great to see you again.
Thanks, Andy. Lots of love, everyone.
Thank you,
Ciao.
Advice students.